Great to see so many people. I was sitting in the front with my back to the audience, so it's impressive to see so many people over here. As Arthur was also referring to Hofstee, I will also probably start with Hofstee as a kickoff of my my speech, and see if this works. Let me see. Yeah. I will be mainly talking about the past and the present, because that's also a bit the way that this day has been organized. In the morning, it's sort of mainly looking back and also discussing the present. Of course, there will be sort of glimpses towards the future, but especially also in the afternoon, we'll focus much more on future issues. And as was mentioned also by Arthur, Hofstee, E.W. Hofstee, Evert Willem Hofstee, was the founding father of rural sociology. And I sort of looked at this picture and sort of compared it to myself, and there were sort of three things that I noticed are completely different. There's the nice suit, and Hofstee was always wearing a tie. There's the cigar in his hand while working. I still remember that. I think smoking was a sort of chair tradition, because Jan Douwe was an active smoker. I was as well. We quit at some moment. And then I thought what has really changed is the phone that he was using. Try to squeeze that in your jacket, the one that he has over there. But Hofstee indeed founded the Rural Sociology Group in 1946, so we're actually celebrating our 76th anniversary today. That mainly had to do with the fact that we originally planned this event on the 24th of September last year, but due to COVID, it would have had to be an online event, and celebrating 75 years online really sucks, so we thought let's just postpone it and wait for a moment that we can actually meet in person and gather. What I will do is sort of go over the history and the present also of rural sociology in a sort of chronological nutshell. So very brief. If you want to read more, it's in the book, the first chapter. If you didn't buy it, it's also available for free as a PDF as of today. So it can also be downloaded or simply read online. So if we look at these 75 years and go back to the early days, the 1946, 1950 period, it was first and foremost the importance of really embedding and institutionalizing rural sociology in Wageningen. As Arthur was saying, it was much more of a natural science or technical university. So one important mission of Hofstee in the beginning was to really embed and institutionalize rural sociology in Wageningen. And one thing that he did with the research was to focus on better understanding interregional diversity, and for that he also developed this concept of farming style that was later again, and we'll come back to that, taken up by Jan Douwe again, but then also to look much more into intra-regional agricultural diversity. But Hofstee really also showed that groups of farmers, they share a particular opinion of how farming ought to be carried out, and that also quite well determines and explains different development patterns in agriculture. This was actually followed then by a sort of second episode of research, which was closely linked to agricultural policymaking and the agriculture modernization era in the Netherlands and also later in Europe. Starting with the question, actually, why are certain farmers willing or able to modernize and others not? And for that, these notions of traditional versus modern dynamic cultural pattern were actually developed. People that were not very much inclined to change, to modernize, very much hold on to the past. Those were seen as more traditional farmers, while the more modern dynamic ones were also open for change. A lot of expert knowledge was actually produced as input for policy making. So I think also research was being done on the importance of farming communities being connected to the outside world, having membership, having subscriptions to magazines, being connected to radio, to TV, connection to the paved road from the farm premises. Those were some of the issues that came forward through rural sociology research. And it also led to the conclusion by Hofstede that it was very important to focus on the one hand on extension, on training or retraining farmers, which also led to the development of the Extension Science Department, which is now Communication and KTI, Knowledge, Technology and Innovation, and more focusing on spatial planning issues as another trajectory that needed to be developed to support the modernization of farming and agriculture and rural areas in general. The 1970s were a bit characterized by a sort of rural sociology crisis. I think there was also Hofstede sort of coming to the conclusion, opinion that rural sociology had sort of done its task. Agriculture had modernized. We had new departments like extension science and spatial planning. But it was not, you could say, just a sort of crisis of rural sociology at Wageningen, but more a general crisis of rural sociology in Europe and beyond. And it also had to do with the close link between rural sociology and actually policy making, sort of developing expert knowledge as input for policy making. And this, at some point also through the 70s and 80s, also led to a reorientation of rural sociology. One thing was to look at the impact of modernization on family farming, and very important in that respect has been the work of Bruno Benvenuti, who developed this notion of TATE, the Technical and Administrative Task Environment, to do research on how power relations within agriculture are shifting from primary production also to these surrounding organizations and institutions, and what that also meant for farmers' autonomy and dependence. So that was also a big research program focusing on that. This was actually followed by a more reflexive analysis of modernization. That's also around the time that Jan Douwe came to Wageningen, especially also with Norman Long, also showing the relation between rural sociology and rural development sociology, or now rural sociology and the group that Bram is heading, sociology of development and change, with a strong focus on the actor-oriented and also labor process approach, also taking a new position within this actor-structure debate that was very vivid at the moment in sociology in general. Resulting in farming styles research in the Netherlands, especially looking at different development patterns in agriculture, and thus more looking at intra-regional diversity, not just looking at what farmers actually thought and their opinion about what is a good way of farming, but also looking at practices, the different ways that actually farms and farming was connected to this technological and administrative task environment, but a strong focus on intra-regional diversity. And a lot of the people, colleagues, former colleagues, have also written their PhD thesis on farming styles in also different agricultural sectors. Mine focused on arable farming in the province of Zeeland, but others have been looking into dairy farming, pig farming, and also glasshouse horticulture. This is a picture that I also found, and I wasn't completely sure, Jan Douwe, was this sort of celebrating 10 years of farming styles research, or was it a bit... So it was actually a large group of people. Some are still here and also have noticeably aged a bit. But quite a few are there, and also in the middle, next to Jan Douwe, is indeed Bruno Benvenuti, who also participated in that day, and it was. I still recall it as a very interesting and fun day that we had, with lots of. I think people are starting to recognize themselves now as well, or pointing to their neighbors, saying, "That's me, 20 years ago, or longer." So, continuing a bit with this chronological nutshell, I think if we look at, say, the last 25 years or so. Out of that farming styles research program that was also led and headed by Jan Douwe, and also the focus shifted much more towards rural development. And I think a major program in that respect has been the impact program, looking at, sort of trying to conceptualize rural development as process of regrounding, of broadening, looking at the broadening of the economic base, combining farming with other activities like nature and landscape management, green care, but also deepening, looking at the development of new food networks, for example, the growth of organic agriculture, quality production, regional quality produce, also led to ongoing research, for instance, on origin food. As Anke was also saying, I was this rural sociologist. I don't know if I was lost in Amsterdam, but that's at least that's where we met. And I was also in 2012 actually asked to become lecturer or professor at the University of Applied Sciences on the topic of foodscape studies and design at the Academy of Architecture in Amsterdam. Which was largely also an urban-based training and research organization. And that's actually how both the issue of food as a specific research theme, but also in relation to the city, to urban development, actually appeared on our agenda. One was sort of coming out of this deepening trajectory within rural development studies to look at alternative food networks, which was very much based also on the quality turn within agro-food food studies. So we did a whole range of projects looking at new food networks, short food supply chains, local food systems, but also looking at the emergence of city-region food networks, and more recently also work on urban food policies was also one of the things that we have done. And last but not least, place-based development, looking at place as a set of practices, relations, and connections is something that was sort of really put on the agenda also through the SASPlace project. But I think it initially also started with the Etude projects, also looking at this notion of rural web, which was also a starting point of that work. And really also, through this relational turn, also trying to go beyond dichotomies like urban, rural, local, global, endogenous, exogenous development, but see things as a coming, as Dori Massey is saying, as a sort of thrown togetherness. And we've done a lot of that work, especially when it comes to these last items that was presenting here through international comparative research in European projects. And these are just some of the logos of the projects that we have been doing, coordinating quite a few. At some moment there was this sort of internal challenge of coming up with more interesting acronyms for projects related around food. So we had Pure Food and Food Links and Superb Food, and there were more, but some of the applications also failed. Otherwise we would have even had a more interesting array of food-related acronyms of projects. One of the last projects that we did was Robust, which focused on rural-urban relations, and we actually sort of started that project in the same place with the meeting. And this is a picture of the Robust team. It was even not completely complete there, but it also points to the growing size of these European projects. So I think the first projects that we started with, if you would take a group picture of the research involved, it would be 10, 20 people. And with Robust, in the end, we were with a consortium of 70 people from 11 different case study areas, 10 countries. And also in the corner somewhere we see Matthew Reed, who will be, you're looking down a bit, Matthew, I think, yeah. Who will chair the Rural talk show in a minute or later this morning. Another way of looking at 75 years of rural sociology is to look at 75 years in 100 PhD graduations, because that was a sort of coincidence that in 75 years we exactly had 100 PhD graduations. And that shows enormous changes if you look over the years. This shows from 1946 till 2020 the number of PhD graduations per year, and so that has increased quite a bit. Something else that changed was the sort of gender balance, the male-female ratio when it comes to PhD graduates. None in the first 25 years, 2 in the second 25 years, of which Sabine was one of those 2, and then 32 versus 42 men in the last 25 years. So that has been a change. It's maybe also a bit reflected in the gender of people speaking this morning and this afternoon. So it's a sort of male lineup this morning, and let's just simply say that sort of maybe reflects a bit the past. But we have a female keynote speaker this afternoon. Maybe also reflects a bit more the present and also the future, and at least we've tried to sort of secure more or less gender balance in the rural talk show today. Something else that has changed is also the number of supervisors per PhD student. So it was mainly sort of 1 in the very early years, and also the second 25 years, but it has moved more and more towards multiple supervisors, 2, 3, or 4. And quite often these supervisors also come from different disciplines. So I think also referring to Arthur's introduction, we also see a bit of a shift from, you could say, very much disciplinary PhD thesis also towards more multi- or interdisciplinary PhD thesis. Another change is the language of PhD thesis, primarily Dutch in the first 25 years, still very much Dutch in the second 25 years, and 1 Frisian PhD as well, thanks to Jan Douwe. And then that completely sort of shifted towards English in the last 25 years, with a few in Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian. That was still possible at that time. We're now in a situation that English is the default language, and I even have to ask for permission to write a dissertation in Dutch and to also defend in Dutch. So that also shows an important change. Where did our PhD alumni come from? In the beginning, primarily the Netherlands, and 1 from another European country, that was Bruno Benvenuti. Still very much Dutch dominated in the second 25 years, and then we see PhD candidates coming from all over the world in the last 25 years. So that also points to the internationalization of research and the group. Also, where they did their research, that was already a bit more international in the beginning, but has become way more international also in the last 25 years. And what else? That is also related to, say, our 3 main research themes at the moment, which will be presented this afternoon: agricultural development, place making, place shaping, and food provisioning. We also see that place and food are becoming more important on our research agenda. And the same also that it's not exclusively rural, but also more looking at, there are more urban studies around food, around urban agriculture, for example, but also more focusing on urban-rural relations. So we are still a rural sociology group even today, but there are much more links also towards the urban in the kind of PhD research that we have been doing. A final thing when it comes to, these are some of the keywords when you, from these 100 PhD theses in the word cloud, but it gives a bit of an idea of the different topics that our PhD graduates have been working on, but there's still a lot of rural and farming and agriculture is there very prominently around rural communities, family farms, rural development, livelihood strategies, policy, etc. A third angle is to look more at some of the consistencies in these 75 years, and what actually sort of defines us as a rural sociology group, and I'll be brief on that. I think one thing that we do is that we focus in our research on people's everyday realities, and whether these realities are in the Netherlands, in the countryside, or in Dar es Salaam, in the city, how sort of food gets into that city, in Latin America, in Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. People's everyday realities is one of the key foci of our research. Another aspect is dynamics. How we don't just look at the present, but also try to understand the everyday realities of people nowadays as they have been shaped by structures, by processes in the past. So it's always about linking the present to the past to really understand the dynamics and ins and outs of people's everyday realities. And we do focus on diversity, but what does that diversity actually mean? What is meaningful diversity? I think the issue of, or the topic of farming styles has been very prominent in that, but it's also one of the key defining features of our research. And we also try to understand that through comparative research, comparing different countries, comparing different farming communities, comparing different farming styles. What are some of the general patterns that we see, and what are some context-specific issues that are at stake? And so that is also the role of comparative research. A relational approach, which also has to do with place-based development emerging on the agenda, looking at relations, but also understanding, for instance, one farming style in relation to the other. Only they get meaning in relation to one another. An economical farmer does not say so much, but becomes more clear what economic farming is about if we can sort of compare that to other styles of farming. So it's always a particular style, a particular pattern in relation to something else that also contributes to meaningful diversity. And last but not least, we try to be critical. I think that's the role of social science, but also engaged. So there's also this idea of being transformative, and that's also what one of the first panel in the Rural Talk Show will also be about that. Our role as a scientist, to what extent should we just be objective, which is impossible, and how much engagement do we show? Are we political or apolitical? Those are some of the issues that will appear on the agenda. For me, I think, and that's I think another characteristic, and I chose this picture to show that, is that doing rural sociology is also teamwork. It's being part of a group. I think that's also why we waited with this date so that we could gather in person. Because in one way or the other, you're all part of what the Rural Sociology Group is, being a former colleague, a collaborator, a former or a current student. And it's, yeah, for me, that has been really also the pleasure of being chair of this group for almost 20 years now, being part of a team, of a nice group of colleagues. And I really enjoy that. That was also this day couldn't have been organized without the input of all those group members, and that refers to making this book, which was a collaborative effort. Lots of contributions by staff members, former colleagues or former staff members, students, former students. Many of those have already been posted on our anniversary blog in the last year, but they have been taken up in the book. Then there has been this beautiful PhD magazine produced by a number of our current PhD students and former PhD students with nice stories. That's also where a lot of the infographics on PhD research came from. Mark Vickel and Lisette Nicole, who is very much up front in this picture, but who is in the Philippines at the moment for her PhD research, also organized a whole seminar series, which unfortunately had to become a webinar series, but we had the last one, or the last two, last Wednesday with Sally Shortle in person in Wageningen. So many people have also contributed to making this day what it hopefully will be, and also these publications that celebrate and commemorate 75 years of rural sociology. So it has been a collaborative effort. And before I close off, there's one person I want to sort of put in the spotlight, and that's Joost Jongerden, without whom this would not have been possible. I think, Joost, you've been the driving force behind the whole day. the book, the blog series, so without you, this wouldn't have been possible. It's a collaborative effort, but there's one person standing out, so thanks very much.